glad that's over. Here we go. Here's my favorite part.
There they all are.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Let's see. I see Bob Lynn. How are you, Bob?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Great, great. Jeff, glad you could join us today. It's funny, all the squares are still moving around a little bit as people are joining us. Hi, Peggy. Well, why don't we give people just one more minute to log on.
Monica, you made this too easy. You sent the Zoom link like 14 times. Usually I enjoy searching around for it and at the last minute and stressed out, but it was hard to do.
We're trying our best, Jeff, to make it as easy for you as to join easiest for you to join us today.
Good job.
Sounds like me. I'm usually in the same boat as you are. Scrambling around looking for a link at the last minute.
But not just a link, but the right link. When you have multiple Zoom meetings, there are a lot of Zoom links flying around the computer.
Hey,
True
Jeff,
story.
it's Larry.
Hey, Larry, nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. Been a long time.
David Ridings, how are you?
Just fine, thank you. So
Good
far,
to see you.
thank you.
Hey, Larry, I met with Jack Rooney this morning and he said to say hello.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I haven't seen Jack for a little while.
Yeah,
Hope you had a good meeting.
it was.
Good.
How have you been, Linda? I haven't seen you in a long time.
I've been happy and busy here at Syracuse University in my launch pad, surrounded by literally the best and brightest on campus who are innovating incredible things. So since you've last seen me, I've put 4,800 students through this program and then have raised $54 million in outside equity investment and launched 140 legally incorporated companies.
Wow, you've been busy.
4,800 students, there's a lot of students. What's the program?
It's called the Blackstone Launchpad, and we're the university's innovation hub. So we're the place students come to either create new ventures or to work on learning innovation skills that they can go take to innovation companies. So one of our students just, worked at Virgin Orbit and worked on the rocket that Richard Branson just launched into space. And so it was total fun to be on the phone or rather on Zoom with her, watching it together, knowing she'd been through our program and now is working there. So yeah, they either launch a company or they go work for an innovation company. That's a ton of fun. So it's nice to see all the former board members when I was on the board, Rita and Larry and others and Bill. Missed you all.
Yeah, I've missed you too, Linda.
Linda, could you at some point maybe give us a little snippet about the diversity and inclusion of Blackstone at Syracuse University? Because I think it's a role model.
Thank you. I do too, B. And if any of you want to see that in action, go to our website. We have a whole section of student spotlight profiles, and every week we publish a couple of stories. So it's not talk, we talk, it is walk, we walk, and we have from the beginning. It's really the bedrock foundation of who we are. A lot of students we work with are first generation college students. Many of them come from single parent families. Most of them come from underrepresented populations. I would say we're well over 50% in terms of diversity and equity. We actually have 2 funded diversity and equity scholar positions that we work with students on those kinds of initiatives. And some of our, rock stars out of the program are students who are great role models who embody that success. Right, B?
Yes, that's why I wanted you to say it.
That's great. Well, it's about 1:05. I think we should probably get rolling this afternoon. We've got a pretty full program for you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monica Merante. Senior Director of Philanthropic Services here at the Community Foundation, and I'm excited to welcome you to our annual reunion of Central New York Community Foundation board members. We really enjoy this chance to reconnect with you each year and to keep you informed on what's going on at the foundation and our work in the community. Just so everyone is aware, we will be recording today's session to share with those who couldn't join us, and we'll also be sending out the link to that recording in an email to everyone later this week. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge some staff members who are joining us today, including our 3 panelists, Peter Dunn, Deshelle Elliott, and Ahmeed Turner. You'll hear from them a little later on, as well as Dara Harper, who's available to troubleshoot any technical issues you might have. Feel free to send a direct message to Dara in the chat if you need tech assistance. We also have a few current board members with us today, and I'm not sure if they've all joined yet, but I'll list them out. Kathy Bertini, Mark Fuller, Lee Gata, B. Gonzalez, ICB, Joe Lazaro, and Larry Leatherman. And again, please forgive me if I missed anyone too, because I'm going off our most recent RSVP list. And finally, we have a few newly minted board alumni who recently completed their terms. Judge Julie Cecil is planning to join us today, as well as Grace Gezzi, and our immediate past chair, Casey Crable. And now I'd like to turn things over to Casey so she can offer an official welcome to everyone this afternoon. Casey?
Thanks, Monica. Good to see everybody on this fairly soggy Thursday. And it's always nice to be reminded of the long history of this organization and the huge numbers of people who've come through the board and made significant contributions to the place that we all call home. When I was thinking about what to say to you as by way of welcome this afternoon, I really thought about 4 things as I like the phrase newly minted alumni. I haven't been newly minted anything in a long time, Monica, so thanks for that. Number 1, the first thing I thought of was how happy I was that I said yes to service on this board. Thank you, Linda, for the ask. I appreciate that. Aside from the fact that it really made 6 years go fast, I learned so much and left the board with a sense of how much more I have to learn. And that's exciting. So thank you all for that. The second thing I thought was how grateful I was to have spent really quality time with the board members that I served with. Our conversations were outstanding. The input and the energy that you bring is inspiring. And I think we were aware most of the time that we stood on the shoulders of the boards that came before us, which are all the folks in the Hollywood Squares this afternoon. So thank you all. The third thing I wanted to say was the profound regard that I hold for the staff of the foundation, having watched their professionalism and their commitment, the quality of their work. They really get the job done, and that was a joy to watch. So thanks to all of you. And finally, the fourth thing I thought that I wanted to say to you is how much I want to stay connected to this organization. So really grateful for opportunities like this. Monica, thank you for putting it together. To all my colleagues on the board, past, present, and those yet to come, what a great organization you're putting your time and your talents toward. Happy to be a part of it. And thanks, Monica, for the opportunity just to say a brief welcome this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Casey. Really appreciate it. Glad that you're here. One housekeeping note that if you'd like to submit questions anytime during today's presentations, please use the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll bring the questions to the speaker's attention as they come up if I'm able. And we'll also unmute everyone at the end in case you have questions or comments you'd like to share then. Now, I'd like to turn the floor over to a familiar face to all of you, our CEO, Peter Dunn. He's going to provide an update on the latest and greatest here at the Community Foundation. Peter?
Thanks, Monica, and thank you, Casey. And it's great to see everyone, albeit virtually today at this session. We like to have these in person, certainly, and we're hopeful that next year will allow us that opportunity. But for today, we're going to walk through a couple of things. I'm going to do an overall kind of financial and programmatic update for the foundation, and then we're going to be joined by a couple of my colleagues, Deshelle Elliott and Ahmeed Turner, to talk about two very significant programmatic initiatives of the foundation. So first off, where are we? So we're entering the last year of a strategic plan that a number of members of, who are with us today participated in helping to create. And the major tenets of the plan are right here, what you see here. To grow by 50% in 5 years by inspiring greater giving. Why grow? Because the community needs us to be a larger and even more vibrant philanthropic force. Be nimble at a time of change. When we were looking at this and thinking of time of change, originally it was because there were so many different things going on. There were new streams of government funding. United Way and Allen were both re-looking at, Allen Foundation were both re-looking at how they were doing their work. And then, but nimble certainly took on a new meaning this past year. I hesitate to use the word pivot, but we were pivoting all over the place this past year as we went through COVID and all the changes that it wrought. So that, you know, was a reaction to the time that it was written, but it was foresight to where we found ourselves this past year. Creating new ways to have an impact, including alternate programmatic schemes like loans and loan guarantees, using data more aggressively in policy advocacy. And then lastly, really being a good steward of our resources and really investing in our operational excellence. Just moving on to give you a sense of where we are financially. We'll go to the next slide. So assets are a picture of where we are. Obviously, assets aren't the only thing. But what you see on this slide is a decade of consistent growth fueled by investment returns and gifts. This past year, you know, it's pretty remarkable. Part of that is the coincidence of timing. Our fiscal year, as you may recall, ends at the end of March. And last year, we were right in the middle of a profound investment correction that then rebounded significantly. The effect of that was that we put on more than 100 million in assets over the past year, which is just absolutely stunning. Our investment performance has exceeded our benchmarks. If you looked at investment performance through the end of March, we were more than 5% above our benchmark, which is pretty material. Since this data was compiled, which goes through the end of March, the foundation's assets at the end of June closed at 391 million. So we've grown another about 11% just in the last little while. I try to keep this in perspective, as my colleagues on the staff have often remind me every time we get excited about where we are, the investment gods point us in another direction. But I think you can see through this a history of growth that's really a function of both significant gifts from local donors as well as really good investment performance. So we're moving on to the next slide. So total contributions, where are we vis-a-vis donors contributing to the Community Foundation? Over the last 5 years, we've received nearly 120 million in gifts. We've seen significant gifts, significant new gifts in the form of bequests and new larger donor advised funds, both of which were principal goals of the strategic plan. Really focusing on particular types of gifts, you know, not being necessarily everything to everybody, but really focusing and trying to be directed towards that area. This, if you were to look over the last 5 years, we've received nearly $20 million in gifts in the form of bequests that have gone to more general funds. Those funds support operations and our grant making and strategic initiatives in the community. So that was also a significant goal of the strategic plan. We had a $10 million goal. We're going to double it during the time, by the time we finish our plan. So we wanted to not only grow, but grow smart and grow in a way that would allow us to amplify our local impact. The other thing that I'll note here before I move on is you'll see there's both yellow and blue. We started tracking in this data organizations, nonprofits that have set up endowments with the Community Foundation. We need to track those differently for accounting purposes. But now I think we have more than 80 local nonprofits that have established nonprofit agency funds. It's still a small part of our work. It's about 5% of our assets, but we see an increasing amount month after month of nonprofits looking to us to support their endowment growth over time. So all this growth, whether it's in assets and contributions, fuels grants, which moves us to the next slide. So over the last decade, we've distributed more than $130 million in grants. And you can see the most recent year, we distributed more than $20 million in grants. That's an enormous amount of activity. If you were to break it down, we made more than 3,600 individual grants to more than 1,300 different nonprofits in the last fiscal year. It's an incredible amount of activity when you start to break it down week to week. A good chunk of that is donor advised grants. About 12 million of the 20 represent grants from our donors, mostly for general operating purposes to local nonprofits, which complements all the other types of grants that we do. This upcoming fiscal year, which started in March, we've seen a significant growth in the discretionary funds that we can push out into the community through our responsive community grant making and the strategic initiatives that we've decided upon. So this year we'll have $3.5 million to be able to deploy across those different strategies, our responsive grant making and our focused initiatives. So a couple of additional highlights. You'll recall that last time we got together, we talked about our COVID-19 community response. When we wrap all of that work up, and it concluded in December, over about an 8-month period, we distributed $2.3 million in grants to more than 100 charities on a rapid response basis. We created a shared governance model across 4 counties with different organizations. The preponderance of this was in Onondaga County with the United Way, the Allen Foundation, the city, the county, and others. But we replicated that work in other places, including in Cayuga and Oswego counties with local funders there. And we created a Madison County Rural Poverty Fund as a way of focusing our response in Madison County. The effort focused on populations that were impacted by the economic consequences of the pandemic. In the beginning, there was a lot of food security and personal hygiene items that were supported, technology to help nonprofits really meet the moment and continue to serve their clients, PPE and supplies, and then some youth-focused grants that focused on both summer programming and initiatives to support youth at a really difficult time with school being virtual and all sorts of other transitions that affected youth and their families. So we are really proud of this work, and I ascribe it in part to the really collegial relationships between the local funders and our government partners, that we were able to pull it together quickly and distribute grants on an expedited basis. If you were to look around the state, you'd see similar initiatives that happened in other localities and other metro areas. So this was very much consistent with what many other community foundations did across the country and across the state. So moving on, I think I had one last thing I wanted to talk about before I turn it over to Deshelle and Ahmeed. So this is the last year of our current strategic plan. One of my themes for this year, as we move into this fiscal year, is really digesting what happened last year and really being able to do some discernment and be thoughtful about how that impacts our work going forward, rather than adding on a whole bunch of new stuff, which we did last year and significantly, really taking stock of where we are and the impact on the Community Foundation as an organization. You know, I'm really proud of how we were able to shift to virtual, to do all the work we did, to work with our board so effectively, and then our external partners. So discernment and digestion, I guess you might say, are themes for the coming year. One of the things that we've been working on in response to donor interest is a new investment pool. So the Community Foundation has a primary main investment pool with more than $300 million in it that crucial partners, Mike Miller and Colonial Consulting, continue to be our investment advisor, as they have been for 25 plus years. But we are creating a new parallel socially responsible impact investment pool that will be funded with some funds from an estate that we received. So we're making an initial $10 million commitment to it. And then donors and agencies can opt into that fund on a go-forward basis. So we've seen some interest in this from donors, and we wanted to offer it as an opportunity to apply specific socially responsible investment screens to a portion of a pool, a discrete part of the foundation, but also allow donors the opportunity to opt in if that's something that they would like to achieve. So we'll know more about that in the future. We're just starting to literally wire money to get the fund started, and had some really great discernment conversations around what that means in terms of socially responsible. We're about to enter a period of what I call strategic sharpening. We're going to take the next year after this current fiscal year to do some additional reflection on where we are and where we're going. We've spent a significant amount of institutional bandwidth and focus on issues of racial equity over the last year, both with our own staff and with our board. And we want to acknowledge that and consider how that impacts our work going forward. I view our upcoming strategic planning process not so much as turning a battleship in a different direction, but really sharpening and thinking carefully about some of the things we are doing and what we might do differently going forward. Lastly, before I turn it over to my colleagues, we're also being really vigilant on proposals that impact donor advised funds and other tax law changes. There's a piece of legislation that was just submitted in the Senate by a couple of senators around donor advised funds and private foundations that both the Community Foundation and our colleagues across the country think is not a positive means of amplifying philanthropy and would have all sorts of unintended consequences. So that's a thing that we're vigilant on, and we are mindful about, and we are very much engaged in as a partner with a lot of other peers across the country. With that, I think I wrap up, and I'm happy to turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Peter. Much appreciated. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Deshelle Elliott, Program Officer on our Community Investment Team. Deshelle is also the lead staff person for our Black Equity and Excellence Funding Initiative, and she was instrumental in building it. So Deshelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Great to see you all, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the Black Equity and Excellence Fund. So we launched this fund in June 2020 in response to the nation's outcry after the George Floyd murder. However, we had been doing a lot of equity-related work in regards to our initiatives, such as our census work, hard-led work, and things of that nature. So this really was kind of taking all of that and putting a stake in the ground and binding it together. So in response to that, we decided to have a real system behind our giving and our strategy, and being more accessible to communities that were in need at that time for this particular type of funding. So we had made a commitment of $1 million towards the initiative that we would spread out amongst throughout the years and give out in multiple rounds. This was really focusing on building community dialogue and increasing the capacity of Black-led organizations, while also supporting historically underserved communities. When we were launching this, we decided to take some time and also move quickly, but trying to also embed the characteristics of listening to our communities of color in this time. So we did a listening tour while talking to different community leaders. We also reached out to some of our national organizations that we know are doing some really great work along these lines that we wanted to try to emulate, but also build upon that fit our local needs. And so currently we are over 500,000 out the door in requests. We are actually in our third round. And we have now over 4 million in requests as of this July as well. Next slide, please. So for the application process, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I say that, I do want to say that this type of grant making is something that is very transformative, because it is a style of grant making that is equitable, but also has a sense of generational and institutional change. This has been picked up by other organizations that are similar to ours throughout the nation, and I'm definitely going to be talking about that a little bit later. But this application process that I will be talking about is very unique. So the application for the Black Equity and Excellence Fund has very simple questions, and they are things like, what does Black Equity and Excellence mean to you? What is your project? Who are you looking to serve, and how are you looking to do it? This definitely helps to tear away some of those harder questions that some organizations that do not have the infrastructure or capacity or that time to really spend looking through data and all of those different kinds of things to be able to build applications, that white-led organizations may have staff members that have dedicated time that they can pay for to do that research and take that time. Typically with Black-led organizations, the folks that are providing the services are also running the organizations or definitely splitting their time in between two or limited staffing. So cutting back on those questions really helps to push the application process forward in a more expedited manner. We also have categories. So we found that during the time when a lot of other corporations or organizations were trying to fund Black-led organizations or Black-led businesses, they were for very strict things along the lines of either poverty or economic needs or development or really specific to businesses. So we decided to take a more creative and innovative approach. And so we created specific categories that would allow people within the community to use their own creativity to solve problems that they identified as their needs. So we removed ourselves from identifying their needs and we allowed them to do that. So the categories are Black youth and students, Black LGBTQ, Black creatives, Black maternal health, Black legacy, Black business, and Black tech. There's also really unique methods of submission. So for the unique methods of submission, organizations do not have to necessarily rely on writing their grant application if writing is not their strong suit. They can submit up to 10 minutes of video and they can be as creative as they'd like. They can submit up to 10 minutes of audio, up to 10 PowerPoint slides, or they can write as well. We've also seen organizations combine them, which has been really great and innovative and alleviating for staff as well, because as you know, we read lots of grant applications, so it's nice to break up some of that along the way. With this process, it allows us to really embed trust-based philanthropy into this work. So more trust, less paperwork for our grantees, but also for our staff. And also this trickles into other departments that help us with our grant making process. But the due diligence and work and the research happens on the behalf of the staff and also our council that I will talk about in a little bit as well. So the process of our great due diligence and research and making sure that organizations are who they say they are and the validity is still there is definitely at our core, but we rely more on that staff, our staffing and our council to do that and less on the applicants. The focus eligibility criteria. So there's just 3 areas of eligibility requirements for this process. Nationally, the definition of a Black-led organization is to be 51% Black-led, which means for your board or steering committee needs to be at least 51% Black or identify as Black. Senior executive leadership needs to be also identify as Black, and then serving primarily the Black community. With this process, we have found that we have had an increase of first-time applicants. So just with three rounds, we have had over 70 first-time applicants and organizations that have been doing really great work in the community for quite some time, yet this is their first time coming to the foundation for funding. We also found that organizations also mobilized more quickly when they found out this process was available to them and formalized themselves so they could be able to apply, which was really great to see. Next slide, please. So this is not just about the grant making process, right? There's so many different things that go along with creating an equitable initiative. And so we have internal goals that are along the lines of increasing our vendors that are from MWBEs, minority women-owned businesses, but also engaging our board and crafting our upcoming strategic plan to really embed equity along the way. We're also making sure that our staff are included along the way during different trainings, but also how we engage with each other on various different levels. And externally, we're using this to build civic and social and financial capacity of the Black community, while also increasing leadership and Black organizations and visibility as well. So this has really been helpful at helping our staff come along the journey with us so that everybody is along the way and we can move in a quick manner, but also it embeds this equity into all of our processes, whether it's our internal policies that we're reviewing with our equity team, our communication practices, the way our development team is doing great work in diversifying donors, or even down to our other grant making programs that have been also influenced by this process. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to talk briefly about the power dynamics. So originally how grant making in our community grant program runs is that, if you all remember, staff would review requests and they would go to the committee, the grants committee, and then that would move up to our board that would make the final decisions for approval on the grant making process. Well, this is a little bit different. And we also do have affiliate funds that have committees that also help to make some of those decisions. So it's kind of like an infusion of the two with a little bit of, with a lot actually of power sharing in between. So the staff the fund is actually led by a small team of an all Black staff, which allows for equitable leadership, internal integrity, and also opportunities for professional growth, which is really great. And it allows for staff members who probably wouldn't get a chance to be able to lead some initiative of this magnitude, the chance to do so. Our board was also really great, and this is why the training and the internal work is so important, because our board understood the importance of being able to shift power to also, so it doesn't just look like it's for optics for us to have an all Black council, but that they're actually able to have decision-making power and voting power. And of course, our board oversees for legal reasons, making sure that everything is all together and good to go. However, the actual grant making is happening from our all Black council with also the guidance of our staff. This is really trust-based philanthropy in action, trusting that the organizations are doing what they say they're going to do, but also having that trust in staff to know that we're also guiding them properly along the way. And this is showing that our board gave power to give power, because that's that piece that was between diversity, equity, and inclusion that tends to be missing. So giving that power binds those three words together. And of course, adjusting that process then expedites the results. So because we don't have to go through the committee or or through the board to make these decisions, this tends to help us get our grants out the door more quickly. So the council was community requested and community structured. They gave their feedback. We presented a list. We've also been able to add and take away from that list with their guidance. And our council also has a charter that is mimicked after our council, our CNYCF's committee and our board's charter. So they're structured very similarly, but also they're trained the same way that a grant staff is trained in grant making as well. So this really helps to be able for us to have possible future board members in a pool waiting for us down the line, or even folks who might want to see an opportunity for grant making as a career path. They have that experience under their belt as well. And they have that decision-making ability that is honored at the staff and board level. Next slide. And so, Monica, I think should I hold off on the questions, or should we keep going? Because I saw that there was some in the chat.
If there was one sent directly to you, feel free to answer that, Deshelle. I didn't see it in my chat list, but feel free. Okay.
No, I think we'll keep going. That I just saw some things popping up. But right now we have a video from actually our second round of funding Black Cub production, which received $25,000 to get youth involved into filmmaking. And so we asked a question on our application: what does Black equity and excellence mean to you? And this is their response, and they did a video submission for their application.
Black equity is being able to generate wealth, having value, being recognized as the best, and it's a celebration of Black life. But most importantly, it's about access and opportunity. With access and opportunity comes Black excellence.
Next slide here. I think the video might have cut off a little bit. Usually it goes a little longer. I'm not sure. Did it? It's
I
okay.
wonder if maybe we can share a link to the full video separately when we send up the follow-up email, because I remember a little bit more content in there too.
Yeah, it's about a minute long, so I must have cut off.
Yeah, not to worry. We'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email. Thanks, Deshelle.
Great. And also another category, it was for Black maternal health, and this is Village Birth International. And so an alarming statistic is that Black women tend to have the highest rate of morbidity and mortality when giving birth and being pregnant. And so this is this group's reason on what Black equity and excellence means to them, and it means to them, and also they definitely are expressing why this is important work. So this group actually trains women for free to become doulas, so they can have that additional support when giving birth. Next slide, please. And so briefly, this is our Black Equity and Excellence Council, and you can read all about them on our website. And it's comprised of grassroots leaders. We also have a transplant that has been here from out of Chicago into Syracuse. It's been here for a few years. Dr. Jackson, she runs CFAC. But also we have members the members of our council also are affiliated in some way with the categories that we have available for funding as well. And I just wanted to let you all know that this process has also, staff has been working with other foundations across the nation to recreate our process, such as the Cleveland Community Foundation, the Pepsi Foundation, the Rochester ESL Foundation, and we've also done a little bit of work with the United Way of Rochester as well. And we also have recently just launched a policy paper explaining our reasoning on why we have launched the Black Equity and Excellence Fund. Next slide. And any questions? If not, thank you all.
Please feel free to use the chat feature too if questions come up as you're listening to the other presentations. We'll also be opening up questions at the very end and unmuting everyone. So this won't be the last chance to ask Deshelle about the Black Equity and Excellence Initiative. Thanks so much, Deshelle. Our last panelist is one of our newest employees, although he's certainly not new to his role. If you were up extra early this morning, you may have caught his interview on Channel 9 News. Ahmeed Turner, the executive director of Say Yes Syracuse, is going to share some historical context on Say Yes, including an overview of the wide variety of services and resources it provides to Syracuse students, and what it means now that he and his colleague, Dana Lyons, have come under the CNYCF umbrella. Ahmeed?
Thank you, Monica. And it's good to see you folks. Good afternoon. There's some familiar faces I saw when we were convening in the beginning, and there's some new faces. So pleasure to meet you. So I'll just get right into it on Say Yes to Education. What is Say Yes Syracuse? So in 2008, Say Yes to Education Incorporated came to Syracuse, and they were looking for a community to partner with to look at equity in education. And when they came to Syracuse, what they wanted to do was look at three kind of tenets that they thought would enhance our kindergarten to 12th grade matriculation rates and our high school to college matriculation rates, and ultimately college completion, thereby driving economics for the Central New York community. So what you see there on the left, Say Yes Syracuse, is an economic revitalization initiative. Basically, the philosophy is if we can drive education and increase high school to college graduation rates, student performance, we will be able to drive economics for the region. So one of the things that in our philosophy, in the Say Yes philosophy, we were looking at was limiting the barriers that get in the way of classroom participation. So that included a couple of things. One, it included extracurricular activities or experiential learning activities. So if any of you were around during that time and you heard about Say Yes, you probably heard about the after school programming that was happening, the extension of school during the summer that was happening. We did a lot of that. But some of the other things that we also looked at things that limit classroom participation was also some of the legal barriers that students face while their families face. And that's simple legal issues like landlord-tenant issues, custody issues, things of that nature. Something else that we looked at was social emotional issues. So right now in each of the Syracuse City School District schools, there is a family support specialist. That specialist is there to one, help each school's administration identify students that may be in need, and then get those students connected to community resources that can help them out, and also help that family strategize on how to limit the barriers that get in the way of their students coming to school and participating in classrooms. Something else that was part of that particular strategy was looking at all of the pathways that students have to college and making college affordable. So that's where the community partners started an endowment with the Central New York Community Foundation so that every student has an opportunity to go to college, and they don't have to look at the cost of college as a barrier. So when you look at the column there on the right, Say Yes has been in existence for 13 years. And what you see there in those bullet points is very, very significant. So Say Yes has been around. We have, the structure has been in place over the course of 3 mayors, 3 superintendents, 2 Syracuse University chancellors, and 2 county executives. So that structure has been able to survive that. And as we all know, characters play an important role in these collaborations, but the structure that we have has been able to withstand the transition of characters. And just a note on the Central New York Community Foundation, when Say Yes first came, something that brought these entities, our partners to the table, was the seed funding. But the Central New York Community Foundation has really been the glue to keep those entities at the table. And they've been an honest broker, remaining neutral and keeping the best interests of students at heart, and really the best interests of the region at heart. Okay, next slide. All right, so what is Say Yes to Education and how does it work? So what you see there in the circle, scholarships, comprehensive support, stronger public schools, will lead to increased post-secondary completion, which will lead to economic revitalization. So what exactly are the services that are happening? These, what you see here for grades K-12, pre-college and college, represent all of the various activities that are happening in each of the Say Yes chapters. So there is a Syracuse Say Yes chapter, there's a Buffalo Say Yes chapter, there's a Cleveland Say Yes chapter, and there is a Guilford County, North Carolina Say Yes chapter. Each of those chapters are kind of made up differently, but the tenets in those chapters remain the same. So what you see in grades K-12 for early child, the first check mark is early childhood development supports. Here in Syracuse, something that we wanted to look at was looking at children in pre-K and their entree into kindergarten, and we did some work there. The Early Childhood Alliance was very instrumental in that. Social services, family supports, mental health care. I would go so far as to say, if you really want to talk about systems change, the county, the city, the Syracuse City School District really restructured how they support students in schools. So for an example of that is in each of the Syracuse City School Districts, there is a mental health clinic. The facility is a person, there's a person that's there. So a student that needs that type of support doesn't have to leave campus. They could get that support right there in the school. And there are also Promise Zone behavior specialists. So as you all know, a student that's in need of clinical mental health support has experienced trauma. The behavior specialist will help that student reintegrate into classroom. So as you can imagine, if you go and you start dealing with some of the traumatic issues, especially as a child, it may be hard to go back into a classroom and just assimilate back into the classroom expectations. So there's that happening. The legal clinics. The legal clinics originally started as satellites for folks around town to do pro bono work that would help with students, and that evolved into the Volunteer Lawyers Project. The Volunteer Lawyers Project currently helps anybody really in Onondaga County that is facing some legal issues, and they continue to work with Syracuse City School District students and families. With healthcare, many years ago, Say Yes Syracuse partnered with Salvation Army and with Catholic Charities to make sure that all students were connected to Child Health Care Plus, which is a benefit in New York State that is offered to all children in the state. And then summer camps and after school programs, that's kind of what I talked about in the beginning, that Say Yes supported. That is still happening now. So important to note that all of the activities are happening, and they are supported by the Syracuse City School District. They're also supported by our partners, and the Central New York Community Foundation acts as a pass-through to make sure those things are happening. And not to mention that a couple of years ago, the Syracuse City School District developed their behavior code of conduct, and all of these structures are built into their behavior code of conduct, so they have to adhere to that to make sure they're supporting students. When we look at the pillar there in the middle for pre-college, we have college and financial aid assistance. We do that ourselves. My colleague Dana and I do that ourselves. And we also work with an association called the New York State Financial Aid Administrators Association. Every year they have an initiative called College Goal Sunday, and they've been doing this since 2011. They go to each of the Syracuse City School District high schools. They recruit volunteers that are financial aid administrators or financial aid counselors at our local colleges that include Syracuse University, Lemoyne College, Onondaga Community College, Bryan Stratton, Oswego, Cortland. They all come to each of the high schools, and they will help families complete a FAFSA application and a TAP application. And trust me, if you have been through that process, it's akin to completing your taxes, especially if the school has a CSS profile. So they can get that type of support. A mentoring program recently in Syracuse, we are partnering with Believe in Syracuse to launch a career mentoring program. And the goal of that is to help students transition from college to career. We believe that by offering that here and getting students connected to a network, we'll be able to retain more talent as students transition into their careers. High school to college transition programs, there is a program like that in Buffalo. We're working with the Syracuse City School District. What I will say here is that the Syracuse City School District in New York State have really expanded all of the pathways to high school graduation by instituting P-TECH. And P-TECH is like a hybrid program by which students enter into that. And when they complete their program, they will complete their program with a post-secondary certificate or degree. Boys and Men of Color Initiative is something that is in Buffalo. Something that we have here is called the Building Men Program, and we work with them. And then College Transition Curriculum and Development. Again, that's something more akin to Buffalo. When you look at the third pillar there in yellow for college tuition scholarships, which is our golden nugget. Just so you all know, we are fully endowed. We're the only Say Yes community that is fully endowed. And actually, if you look at the landscape of college promise programs, we're one of very few that's fully endowed across the country. For mentoring programs, I kind of mentioned that. For our ambassadors program, we have over the course of a couple of years been trying to foster Say Yes scholars that we feel would be good ambassadors for the program. We look at paid internships, on college success counselors. We rely heavily on our college partners and the career centers to help us with that. And then with mental health care, I think something that Onondaga Community College is doing and has been very successful with is having like a navigator. It's really a system, and I can't think of the name of it, Casey, but I'm aware of it, that students that are in need of that type of support can go to a center there and get it. They will either get them connected to support resources in the community, or they will support them directly. All right, next slide. All right, so here we go with our 2019-2020 report card. And if you look there, so annually we award over $1 million in Say Yes scholarships, and you'll see that in the total right next to the pig on the bottom right-hand side. We awarded $1,065,551. We have 3 separate funds. So there is a tuition award. We are a last dollar scholarship. And what that means is that we will look at tuition and we will apply, if a student is eligible for a federal Pell Grant, we will apply that towards tuition. And if they go to school in New York State and they're eligible for a tuition assistance program called TAP, we will apply that towards tuition. And if there's a gap, we will make sure the gap is covered. So that's where the last dollar scholarship comes in. We also have something called an opportunity grant. And let me just digress for a minute there too. You'll see next to, right above the total tuition award, last year for the tuition award, we awarded over close to $600,000. We have another grant called an opportunity grant. So public schools in New York State is relatively cheap compared to other states in the country. Last year, it was $7,070. Students that get the maximum Pell Award and the maximum TAP Award will get enough funds to cover tuition most of the time. Not most of the time, all of the time. We know that the cost of attendance is different than the cost of tuition. So the cost of attendance at any institution in New York State, if you're looking at room and board, if you're looking at fees, if you're looking at all this other stuff, is probably going to be north of $12,000 to $13,000, depending on if you want to eat 3 times a day or if you want to eat 2 times a day and have a snack. So we know that even though a student may be getting the maximum Pell Award and the maximum TAP Award, there's still going to be a balance on the cost of attendance if they want to live on campus. So we have the opportunity grant. Something unique that we did with the opportunity grant in the past couple of years, about 5 years ago, we expanded the opportunity grant. So the policy on that originally was that students had to be receiving the maximum Pell Grant award and they had to be living on campus. What we did about 5 years ago was expanded that and said, if a student is receiving enough in the combination of TAP and Pell, they'll be eligible for the opportunity grant. And the rationale on that was that there are, you could have a family profile of, let's say, 4 people, 2 adults, 2 children. The family income is, let's say, $45,000 a year. That family is not going to qualify for the maximum Pell Award. But that doesn't mean that that family is living on easy street and can pay whatever. So what we found is that there was, that's like the epitome of a middle-class family. And we wanted to expand the award, so we did that. Another thing that we did to expand the award was we found that especially in Buffalo and in Oswego, there were a number of students that would opt to live off campus. So they would get an apartment, let's say 5 or 6 people, to defray the costs of college. So we expanded it there and said, okay, if you are doing that and you can provide your lease agreement, we will expand the opportunity grant there. And then just in this past year, we expanded the opportunity grant to $3,000. It was previously $2,000, it's now $3,000. So we've done a number of things to be equitable and to be fair with the awarding there. And then we have a choice grant, and the choice grant is for students that are attending private colleges. There is an income cliff there. If this family income is $75K or below, our private colleges, per our agreement with them, will guarantee the tuition for that student. And that's at all of our private colleges except for Syracuse University, where there is no income at all, and the University of Rochester. And it is very, very important to note that when those funds get guaranteed, it comes from their institutional resources. So for example, at Syracuse University, they awarded north of $5 million for Say Yes scholars at their institution. That came from them. It didn't come from the local endowment. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. Since 2008, we've been able to leverage over $17 million. And to date, we've awarded over $12 million in scholarships. And excuse me, I said that wrong. We've leveraged over $144 million. Just last year, we were able to leverage $17 million. All right, next slide. And this is how our students have been performing. You'll see that our students are persisting at rates higher than the national average. So last year, our students persisted at 79%. You'll see by the numbers there on the right-hand side. The national average last year was 74%. And when you look at our students, the students that persist from or matriculate from high school to college is about 63%. When you look there on the right, our scholars, we have a lot of scholars attending public universities versus privates. And we have a lot of scholars attending two-year universities versus four-year universities. And they are performing well. Our demographic breakdown is a 54-43 split with more females attending as opposed to males. And something that I think our community could be very proud of is that in 2019 to 2020, and really dating back to 2017, our student high school graduation rates have been leveling out by demographic. You'll see there for Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American students. In some cases, we are right at the graduation rates for white students, and in some cases, we are exceeding those. And that is a community effort. Next slide. And I'm going to be really quick because I'm running short on time, but the Ascension New York Community Foundation, I mean, what could I say? You'll see the three bullets there. They're a student of the Say Yes to Education Endowment. They were very, very instrumental in the endowment being fully funded, especially with New York State. They're a pass-through for wraparound supports in the schools. And like I said earlier, an honest broker with the Say Yes partners. And I can't emphasize how important that is to keep people at the table and be a neutral broker. As a steward of the Say Yes Education Endowment, really the Community Foundation put a lot of its capital and trust equity at stake to move the community forward for this important endeavor. Like I said, support services are provided to all Syracuse City School districts. And it's really the first of its kind in New York State. So prior to family support specialists being around, there was no model. The partners really engineered how the funding model would be. And the Syracuse City School District was the architect of how that looks in the school. And I believe that is it.
So I want to thank Ahmeed and Deshelle for their presentations. We're really proud of the work and hope you found the presentation interesting. A couple of quick points. Number one, a couple of folks who are here on the call were on the board when we first engaged with Say Yes and made the initial $1 million commitment that we made to get the program going on the scholarship side. Today, we manage a $35 million scholarship endowment for city kids that didn't exist 12 years ago. So that initial commitment has paid dividends in the form of creating permanent capital for kids in the city. Ahmeed made a point about the the graduation rates. When we started this conversation a dozen years ago, the graduation rates in city schools was around 48%. And today it's pushing 70%. It's not all about Say Yes. The city schools have done amazing work that Say Yes was a partner in helping to move that up and also do it equitably where investments have really leveled out the graduation rates, so everybody is succeeding. So how can you help? And I'm going to answer a question and then turn it back to Monica and Dan. First off, to be an ambassador and advocate and to support our work, you have friends who are civically engaged and share a love for the community. Support our community fund and strategic initiatives in ways that are appropriate to you, or create a funded legacy plan if that works with your current situation. We have many of our current and former board members who have invested in the community foundation in different ways, either currently or in the future. We hope you'll consider connecting us in certain ways and ultimately share our story and your story and our story of how you've engaged with us through time. I want to answer the one question that came up about the legislation, then I'll turn it over. So Tom put a link in there around legislation. It's in the Senate. There isn't a companion bill in the House yet. It was proposed by Senator King from Maine and Senator Grassley from Iowa. I wouldn't say there is a lot of momentum around it. There are folks who have issues with donor advised funds, but they specifically have issues with the commercial gift funds. The Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard funds are not popular. A lot of people in the nonprofit world really don't like them and don't like what they represent. Commercial interests creating their own captive nonprofits and charging investment fees to those funds and then facilitating giving. So that's one thing. So the commercial funds are profoundly unpopular. Community foundations are not, and community foundations are viewed positively. We all are very engaged with local officials. I can speak for myself and say I have meetings this month with the local reps for Senator Schwab and Senator Schumer and Gillibrand, as well as Congressman Katko and all sorts of other legislative leaders. So folks know how we're engaged and how we're rooted in community. The legislation actually has a carve out for community foundations, but it's really imprecisely drawn and really not particularly useful. And it also affects private foundations in terms of their payout. But ultimately, it's legislation in search of a problem. There's a concern that donor advised funds don't pay out enough. Our donor advised funds last year paid out double the private foundation rate. The payout was around 10%. Nationally, the average is closer to 20%. So it's legislation in search of a problem because some folks have some issues with the commercial gift funds. So we'll see. I'm not confident that it's going to move anywhere. And it certainly has mobilized. Community foundations have mobilized nationally to engage with legislators to make sure that our interests are represented as well as that of our partners and our donors. With that, I'll turn it back to Monica.
Thanks, Peter. I know that we've got a couple of questions in chat, and before we get to those, I wanted to open the floor to our new chair, Dan Fisher. He'd like to offer a few words as he begins his term leading the CNYCF board. Dan?
Thank you, Monica, and good afternoon, everybody. I had a few things to say that I think I will defer to actually, what I'm going to do is Peter and Casey have covered well the comments that I had to make, but I do have a quotation that I would like to share that I think is apropos given the nature of commitment that folks on this call have and the commitment that the Community Foundation has to our community. This quote comes from a guy who grew up in extreme poverty. He ended up being a general in a number of engagements around the world, Army general. At one point, he was the county manager for Fulton County ahead of the Atlanta Olympics. And then finally, at another point in his career, he was head of public schools in Seattle. And at one point, he was asked, what comments would you have to say about leadership and leadership development? And let me just share with you what he said. When anyone asks me that question, I tell them that I have a secret to success in life. The secret to success is to stay in love. Staying in love gives you the fire to ignite other people, to see inside other people, to have a greater desire to get things done than other people. A person who is not in love doesn't really feel the kind of excitement that helps them to get ahead and to lead others and to achieve. I don't know any other fire, any other thing in life that is more exhilarating and is more positive a feeling than love is. And I just thought I would share that. You know, it just seems to me that the Community Foundation and all the folks that are drawn to the foundation, both on the staff side as well as at the board level, embrace that concept of love, you know, love for the community and all of the constituents. And so that's the message I have today. Onward and upward, Monica.
Thanks so much, Dan. That was great. All right, now if there are some additional questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and share. You can also continue to submit questions through the chat box. We'll be monitoring that as well. If you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute unless you're asking a question, that will help us minimize background noise and ensure that we can hear questions clearly. I know that Bill Broad was somebody who had mentioned that he had something that he wanted to ask. Bill, why don't you start things off?
I wanted to ask Dashiell about a particular organization called Option Zero. They're actually in my building now. He's a young, hungry guy who's really doing a great job taking kids off the street. And I know he applied originally, and when he started, he had about 8 kids. And the last time I stopped in to see his program, he had to have 50 or 60 kids in that place jammed in. And I know his goal is to start doing after school mentoring, and he needs computers to do that. But it sounds like this is a perfect program for him.
Yeah, so he was actually a recipient in our second round of funding. So he applied to receive some equipment, flooring, and based off of that, he was actually able to expand the amount of youth that he was able to serve. So I've been in direct communication with Curtis. He's really great, keeps the kids involved. He actually did apply during this round, but he still needs to just close out his current grant because it hasn't been quite a year yet. He's still spending things down, but we're in communication with him to actually come in either for our community grant round or another round of BE&E funding, because organizations that come in through the BE&E application can still apply for other grant opportunities with the foundation as
well. I'll start charging him rent to help you spend that down.
Great question, Phil. Thank you. Another that I saw come up in chat was from B, and B had a question about graduation rates among Native Americans. And I believe that Dana had addressed that in chat. I wanted to see if you had something additional that you wanted to ask on that topic, B. Oh, you might still be on mute.
I'm reading Dana's answer. Yeah, I just posed the question because a lot of times we don't make any progress until we become very intentional about what we're trying to do. And so, you know, as I look at those numbers, Peter mentioned that at one point the graduation rates were under 50%. The graduation rates for Latino students in the last decade have been as low as 30%. So it's amazing the success that we've had, but it's because it's been intentional, right? And so the Native student population I know is has complicated issues, but I just think it's worth an effort, right? It's just let's pay attention and not give up, because we have to stay in love, right? We have to stay in love with what we're doing and the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and so I think something that with the family support specialists and the way they work with the building administration, there's a tiered approach to student support, right? So there's the one level where everyone gets the support. An example of that would be when I worked at Salem High, students or teachers would come to their classroom, they go in, they sit down, they drink their coffee, student puts their stuff in their locker and they come into class. And something that was implemented school-wide was a student had to stand at their door and greet every student that came into the class. Every student got that intervention, right? And then the second tier is for students that are doing everything well, and we just want to reinforce that, right? So a student could earn an opportunity to participate in recess during lunch if they gain so many points or something like that. A third tier in that is to identify students like Native American students. These are students that are quiet, that could go either way, that just do enough to get through the school day without getting attention. And I think, B, that we could certainly advocate that more attention gets paid to Native American students in that tier. The last tier are for students that are high flyers. And oftentimes in the Syracuse City School District, that demographic is, they're not behavior, they're not a student that's going to be behaving badly and getting a lot of attention. So just to your point, I think there is some things that we can do, but I would also say in that tiered approach is designed to catch those students that can go either way.
So we can talk offline some more, but working directly with the Onondaga Nation School and Lafayette Central School, right, which is probably the pathway that most of these students are taking, might be a little bit out of the box solution. And it's never hurts to have a good relationship with the clan mothers and the chiefs at Onondaga to help break through some of that, some of those barriers. But anyway, we'll talk more. Thanks.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Thanks, B. Other questions and comments?
Monica, Eric Mower, hi. I've got a question for Ahmeed, please. Ahmeed, Buffalo and North Carolina were both Say Yes communities. And when they discontinued with Say Yes, when Say Yes discontinued in Syracuse in 2016 or so, when did they disconnect, if they did, with Buffalo and North Carolina? I've lost track of those two.
Yeah, how's it going, Eric? It's good to see you, first of all.
Good to see you.
So in each of the communities when Say Yes launched, there was a contract that they had with the partners. So in 2016, that contract had expired. It was done in Syracuse. And Buffalo, they discontinued the contract, I believe, in 2018. They started there in 2016, and it was a 6-year contract. And in Guilford County, they are still, I think they're still on the hook for like another year on that contract. But when those contracts expired, actually Syracuse was ahead of the curve. When the contract expired, the agreement was that all of the supports that were started with the seed funding would be sustained locally. And here, all of the supports that were started with the seed funding are still going.
And has the benefactor behind Say Yes withdrawn all of his support to every community? In other words, are they spending no more money anywhere on anything?
Yes, that's correct. The corporation is dissolving its 501c3 status.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Eric. Also, fantastic piece of artwork that you have behind you. That's really beautiful.
It looks like a Juan Cruz, or maybe it isn't, but it looks familiar. I wanted to just amplify what Ahmeed said. So Guilford County, Buffalo, Cleveland, and Syracuse are the communities. Say Yes finished all of its commitments that it made at the national level. Guilford and Cleveland were the last two. The thing that happened here was there wasn't a separate nonprofit. In Buffalo, the Say Yes is a separate locally based nonprofit. Here, we always worked on a virtual basis, and working with the board here, we agreed to take on the two Say Yes staff, Ahmeed and Dana. So they're part of our team now, which has created sustainability, since we're the place where the network is based out of, and then we also manage all the endowment. So I think it's also helped with confidence building with all the partners.
And it was nice to add 2 more people to our team. Although Ahmeed and Dana joined us kind of in the middle of the pandemic, so some of us haven't actually met them face to face yet. Other questions today? I know we threw a lot of information at you today. There's a lot going on at the Community Foundation. Well, it's about 2:15, and I hope that we've been able to answer most, if not all of the questions that you had at top of mind, but please feel free to follow up with us after today's event to continue the conversation, or if you'd like to take a deeper dive on any of the topics covered today. Dara's going to post my contact information in the chat box, and I welcome your call or email anytime. I'm always a good starting point for folks at the foundation. I can make sure to connect you with the person who's the best resource for you. We're so happy that you joined us today. I was hoping last year at this time that we were going to be able to invite you back to the Philanthropy Center in 2021, and that didn't happen, but I'm hoping against hope that 2022 is our year and we can have you back in the building and enjoy spending the afternoon with you face to face. In addition, our staff just genuinely enjoys seeing you all each year and reconnecting. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being our ambassadors in the community. Please keep in touch and enjoy the rest of your summer. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Monica.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Good to
Monica.
see everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.